Now, the Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has ordered that no materials should be exported from the country in their raw forms any longer. The order came via a presidential statement on Monday on the heels of the ongoing world leaders' response to the latest threat to the world trade as the United States slams new tariffs on goods coming into America. Bringing in more insight into these from the East African region perspective is my guest, Agnes Gitau. She is the Executive Director of the Eastern African Association for the UK and the European Union. Ms. Gitau is also the Managing Partner at the GBA's Africa, based in London. Good evening, madam, and thank you for connecting in to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, welcome. So give me your first word on the ongoing global trade tariffs war unleashed by the United States.
It is certainly business as usual for us in the most unusual times. For businesses reliant on international trade, this is a chance, an opportunity to rethink market strategies with traditional partners turning inward. Now it's time to look outward, explore new markets, explore diversified products, and also deepen our inter-Africa trade through the Africa Free Trade Agreement. We need to be agile because I believe agility will define winners. But it's business as usual because trade, as we know it, trade must continue regardless of what America or the developed economies decide.
It seems to say it's not business as usual, but what would the ramifications of the unfolding trade war mean, broadly speaking, for sub-Saharan Africa?
So immediately, of course, it's going to be cost of production will go up. Access to markets will become more difficult. It's already been very difficult for African product to access markets. And as you know, traditionally, we have looked for markets. Our engagement with our export market has been in raw materials. And therefore, it's going to be harder. Cost of production, cost of doing business and manufacturing will go up. Remember, we rely so much on machinery from the West. Right. So that will certainly disrupt the supply chains. But it's certainly, as the president of Uganda highlighted, we cannot just say we cannot import or export raw materials. We need to build the infrastructure in country, use these opportunities to leverage on what advantages or our competitiveness we have to try and address the ongoing uncertainty in the global market.
Of course, we expect the impacts of these on the East African market or the sub-Saharan market. But talk to me about what you have been hearing on ground in London and from the outside regarding how East African big economies led by Kenya will be responding to the tariffs.
You know, firstly, I'm sure different countries will, at individual level, try and find resolutions. But I see almost a collective approach, particularly from the East African community, because to try and renegotiate, to try and find opportunities as a bloc under the East African community, because we believe as a collective you have a bargaining power, right? And I think that approach, I am aware that the regional heads of state will approach that. At the same time, this does not stop the national approach. So Kenya, for example, as you know, under the previous administration under Biden, Kenya-US trade negotiations were ongoing. The Eastern African community has access to AGOA, which at the moment we have no idea where the future for AGOA is. But there is that desire, particularly from the private sector, wanting our governments to be proactive rather than reactive, to ensure that we have a trade policy that is regional rather than individualistic, because we believe that's where there is value for us. But may I add that apart from just looking at the US market, there has been a charm offensive by our leaders from the region. Just this week, we've had the leaders from East Africa. We had the president of Zanzibar here in London speaking to businesses, trying to reassure them that as the world make it difficult for businesses to trade, our region, our countries are open for businesses. So we've seen that drive by ministers of trade. We've seen that drive by governments wanting to engage directly with industry leaders to give them the reassurance and the confidence that our market are still open. They're open for business, even as we try to grapple with the current ongoing geopolitical and geopolitical uncertainty.
Yes. Ms. Gitau, pardon me to cut in there because quite a few points before I let you go. In terms of recommendations, what will your recommendations be as regards to regional response and its approach? Or do you recommend each country and the East African community try and work out its ways around the present situation?
You know, every country has national priorities, right? And as I alluded to earlier, I'm sure there are going to be individual countries approaching different countries to renegotiate trade relations, right? But my recommendation, if I had a way, I think the approach, given the current situation, the approach and the one that gives us a bargaining power would be to approach this negotiation, whatever they are. You know, renegotiate our tariff rates with the US, renegotiate our market access as our economic bloc, as a collective rather than individual countries, and also collectively market our region for businesses that are in countries where they have been hit by higher tariffs. Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania have 10% tariff. So for countries who have over 34% like China, perhaps this is the opportunity to move their manufacturing plant and look at our market as destination for their manufacturing.
Final question before I let you go. What are the realities that the private sector of industries, commodity exporting companies and others in East Africa should prepare for with regards to the Trump's tariff regime?
Look, there's uncertainties everywhere. So price hikes, obviously. As you know, our industries are highly reliant on import market, particularly for heavy machineries, right? So certainly with this new directive, there's going to be a disruption in supply chains, as I alluded to earlier. But at the same time, the cost of production will go earlier. And what does that mean? That means the cost will be extended to the consumers. And this could have inflation effect, whereby a likelihood of seeing a rise in inflation. But as private sector, I believe that it's an opportunity for innovation, opportunity to seek new partners, but also more importantly, to plan ahead, even in this situation, but also to ensure that they are constantly informed around the constant changing policy direction, remain informed, access the right information to know what affects you, but more importantly, to have opportunities to create dialogue with government in the countries where they operate, to provide feedback of the experiences of the private sector, because the only way we can get out of this is through the private sector leadership. And I think more and more, our governments will be relying on how the private sector and supporting the private sector. Remember, governments don't trade, right? Trade is run by businesses. So how do we support these businesses so that they can navigate the constantly changing environment in the geopolitics and the economics of things?
I think a good place to leave it. Thank you so much, Agnes Gitau, Executive Director of the Eastern African Association in the UK and the European Union. We really appreciate your insight into the ongoing global trade tariffs turbulence. Thank you so much for your time.